Hello, my name is Ben.
And my name is Cheyenne.
And welcome to the Too Vague Podcast. One word, two hosts, stories, trivia, and video games. Got a special guest coming via satellite from our office in Portland.
Portland, Oregon.
The land of Andrew. Now the land of Andrew and Cheyenne.
The city of roses. It goes by that moniker.
Still slinging the coffee?
Sure am. I got a transfer to a new store over here. Still serving up smiles like I always do.
Serving up smiles. Since you've been gone, I get a lot more attitude, but not in a negative way, like a snarky kind of like teasing kind of thing. Yeah, it's sort of like what you used to do to me, but a little bit different because I don't know them.
I was going to say, I used to give you a lot of attitude, so I'm surprised to hear that you're getting more. I'm pretty sure on multiple occasions I might have told you to go to hell.
I think I've screened that from my head because I miss you so much.
Nothing but good memories. We filter out all the bad memories.
Exactly. It's like domestic abuse stuff. Not exactly. No, you weren't beating me in the parking lot as far as I could tell.
I'm not copping to that at least.
You've been playing anything exciting?
I did play Dragon Age Veilguard, which just came out recently.
How many times?
Just the once. I've tried to replay it, but unfortunately the replayability is not as strong as with some other games. I would say it's a decent game. Like, it's very fun to play. The combat itself is very rewarding.
Comparable to the previous, or is this like a step down?
I would say it's different, not necessarily worse, but there are a lot of Dragon Age fans who are pretty upset about a departure from the rich lore heavy and the choice based building mechanic where all of your choices from previous games really matter, and that's just not necessarily the case in Veilguard, unfortunately.
That was a big problem with Mass Effect, where people were complaining about the fact that it didn't impact the story in the ways that they were expecting. I thought it did a pretty decent job of carrying certain characters over. People complain about that too, and it's just like, that's not a selling point for me. I don't want to play a sequel and pull people from the previous. I want to play the story of the person I'm playing. It's kind of interesting to meet different people that are impacted by the overall history, but I don't think that's necessary to tell a good story. But whatever. People have different opinions on this, and in general, I would just say to those folks who are complaining, I suggest that you pick up the pieces of your broken life and move on.
That might be a little harsh. The carryover aspect has always been a big part of BioWare choice-based games.
It always has.
So that's why so many people were upset. And I'm not saying they're right. I'm just saying it's something that their fandom has always loved in the past. When you reference Mass Effect, are you talking about the carryover from Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2 or from 2 to 3?
Both. I mean, didn't 1 carry over to 2 and carry over to 3 in some ways?
The choices build across all 3 games, and I haven't heard a lot of complaints about the carryover in Mass Effect, except for maybe a few minor details from 2 to 3, like companions that you've romanced. There's one companion in Mass Effect 3 who is always getting married to someone else, no matter if you romanced him or not.
Oh.
That's an interesting one, but for the most part, I think the biggest complaints about Mass Effect was the illusion of choice with respect to the ending.
I've got some hot takes as far as that's concerned. I thought that it could have been a great starting point for a new chapter in the series, but everyone complained about it so much. They were complaining about the choice things, but I think just the whole idea of when you remake the world, combining technology and biology into one thing.
Right, the synthesis.
That was a really interesting concept to me that could have really innovated the gameplay and such.
They do have a new Mass Effect coming out. I'm not sure exactly when, but there's a lot of discussion online about what it's going to look like. So who knows?
Isn't what's-her-face, the Asari, is it Asari?
Yeah, Liara T'Soni. She is played by Jamie Marchi.
People, when they saw the trailer for this new Mass Effect that they're working on, saw Liara T'Soni, but quite honestly, call me racist if you want to, but they all look the same to me. There are different facial expressions and different looks.
There's also one green. The rest of them are all blue.
I will probably play it because I do like some BioWare games, but I mean, not to the point where I'm going to be buying immediately. I've been delaying playing a new Atlas game called Metaphor Re Fantasio, which is one of those crazy Persona-ish kind of games.
Yeah, those games can be hard to 100% for sure.
Because you got to put hundreds of hours into them, right? What I've been playing has been... Now, don't make fun of me. Not that I expect you to, but this is going to be similar to when you come over to my house and you see that I have all 7 seasons of the Gilmore Girls in my cabinet type of thing. I'm playing this game called Infiniti Nikki. I think it's the 5th in a series of mobile games, but the trend is now taking some of these mobile games like Star Rail and things and bringing them to the consoles, and you get some better graphics and then also different movement mechanics as opposed to using a touch screen. You're using joysticks and whatnot. Infiniti Nikki is being billed as an open world cozy game.
I can see that based on the pictures I'm seeing.
You're a fashion designer and you've got different dresses that do different things in a platformer kind of way. There's one dress that you get that you will float around. There's one dress that you use that will purify enemies that are corrupted by darkness. There's a lot of platforming kind of puzzle solving, like how do I get whatever this thing is, and you collect stars and you collect things that you need to construct your dresses and stuff. I think it's a cutesy little game. I played it at PAX, but I was frustrated by the fact that usually companies will just give you a gift. Here's a fan, or here's a tchotchke, or here's a whatever.
Right.
And for Infiniti Nikki, they wanted me to do an assignment.
They gave you some homework.
Exactly. They're just like, okay, first you got to play through the demo. Then you got to go over here and take this photo with this person and put it on social media. Then you got to do, and it's just like, I'm here to have fun.
It sounds like quest-based.
Maybe it would be okay if I wasn't so busy with interviews and stuff. Now that you mention that, maybe they're trying to tap into that kind of like go on a quest. But just give me the tchotchke. Give me the thing. You know?
Wow. Impatient much?
Perhaps. I don't know.
We all want instant gratification. That's totally fair.
In certain things. I mean, you know, I am chill when it comes to my days off, as you well know. I'm just kind of like, okay, yeah, you know, let's go. If I am at a show for a reason, I want the thing. I was like, I come over here, I play the demo, you give me the thing, let's just do that. And then also playing some Hogwarts Legacy.
Yeah, I've seen a little bit of that here and there. My friend, at least a couple of them have downloaded that.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's a pretty good mix of adventure, RPG elements, and some cool spells. I myself have not. I probably won't play it. What is your take on it?
It's not bad. I'm not a fan of the Harry Potter universe in general. I haven't found any anti-Semitic Easter eggs. It's fun for what it is. The combat can get a little dull at a certain point. It's a lot of you shoot your whatever the spell is, and then you can knock out whatever protecting thing they have on them.
Whatever ward.
And then you just shoot them with your wand with just like shots. And then you dodge a lot. You get a little prompts. There's a puzzle solving element that they don't really tell you too much about, that you kind of have to figure out in order to unlock these things. I mean, it's pretty good as far as a 3D platform is concerned. It's pretty standard RPG-ish kind of game.
Interesting.
I can't say the story is too compelling to me, but it's fun. I'm trying to complete it, so next time Star is on, she has played through that game a number of times. She is one of the people who really likes the series.
Right.
Because she grew up with that. You know what house I'm in?
If I had to guess, probably a Ravenclaw.
That is me.
I got it.
Absolutely, Ravenclaw. Likes to do my research and such.
I never read the Harry Potter series. That was something my parents forbade me from when I was younger. And then as I got older, I tried a couple times with both the movies and the books. But it's one of those things where I feel like you just had to be there. I kind of missed my window for being into Harry Potter. So, but I discussed at length Harry Potter houses with various people, so
Right.
I think I have the gist of what they all kind of represent.
Also with the movies, I enjoyed the first movie for what it was because it was kind of a world of wonder and it was new and all these things. But then as the series went on, it just was like, more of this. Okay. But then again, I want to see the new thing. You can dazzle me with exciting stories, but usually that's the exception when you come up with a story in this universe that is just as good or better.
Right.
You've got your Aliens, for example, or your Terminator 2. I mean, those arguably are better than the original.
I would agree with you there, yeah. It's definitely not something everyone can do. It's weird how sometimes the second movie in a series is like the best one.
Oh, have you played any of the Indiana Jones game that just came out?
I didn't even know there was one.
It is first person, which is kind of an interesting idea. And you're doing things like whipping and solving puzzles, and it's kind of too late because that's all stuff that's like Uncharted and Tomb Raider. We'll see. A lot of people really do like it. They like the whole idea of being Indiana Jones. The thing that throws me off, at least in the trailer, is seeing Harrison Ford's face and then hearing not his voice, hearing someone else doing his voice.
That's a little jarring.
It sounds enough like him to where it's like, okay, that sounds like Harrison Ford, but the way he says things is not like Harrison Ford. The intonations and so that's what I've been playing. You want to get into a word today?
It's time to get in to the nitty-gritty of it, I think.
The nitty and the gritty.
The nitty and the gritty.
You're the nitty, I'm the gritty.
I want to be the gritty.
You want to be the gritty?
The gritty last time. Mom says it's my turn.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, we have a fun one. Well, I guess fun might be the wrong word, but
I think it is because like I said to you earlier, I got into an interesting conversation with John, one of your previous customers. Yeah, at the coffee shop. And we talked a lot about what this word means and what it means to other people and just kind of stream of consciousness. So without further delay, let's get into the definition. Let's do that. Do you want to do the definition for old time's sake? It's been a while.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Which one are you doing?
Oh, this is the Oxford languages.
Oxford. Yes.
Did I say that wrong?
No. I could just call them Oxford because it just seems
Oxford
like it's a person, Oxford. You know, because you got Merriam and Webster over there. And then who do you have over in Oxford? You just have the comma. That's about it.
My gosh. Well, today we're going to be talking about failure, like my failure to get your joke just then.
Which one?
Oxford.
Oxford. Yeah, it's not really a joke. It's just a dumb thing. It's just me being goofy. I know. Like surprise, surprise, right?
The definition of failure from Oxford languages is just simply a lack of success or the omission of expected or required action, as in their failure to comply with the basic rules. So pretty simple definition there for such a large concept.
Yeah. There was a piece there under the lack of success. Also, an unsuccessful person, enterprise, or thing. Like that person is a failure.
Right.
Which is, I would say, different than lack of success, right? It's like this thing was a failure as opposed to that person is a failure.
Yeah, it seems two different things there when a person versus a thing is a failure.
Right.
Which I think we'll definitely dive into because I don't know that anyone can ever really be a failure, at least not completely.
Yeah, it's counter to what you would expect, but I think it's a very positive word.
Exactly.
Oh, there's another one here that is the action or state of not functioning.
Oh, I see. Symptoms of heart failure.
Yep. And then you've got collapse of a business, a sudden cessation of power. That's a tongue twister. Do you want to talk about the origin or should I talk about the origin?
You go for it.
Okay. Mid 17th century, originally as failure in the sense of non-occurrence and cessation of supply, from Anglo-Norman French failure and Old French failure, see fail. There's this without fail here, which is also an interesting phrase with the word fail. Absolutely predictably, with no exception. Are you looking at the Google Ngram Viewer, my favorite thing in the world?
I am. It looks like it picked up a lot in the last century or so.
Do you think that means a lot more people failed? Or do you think that
It's definitely a lot more describing a fail. But what's interesting is it's actually gone down. Since 2000, it's dropped pretty solidly. Actually, from 1984 or 5, it's dropped.
it's on a steady decline, the use of failure in print?
Interesting.
But it peaked in the 80s when we were all failures, I guess. Interesting. Word use in print. So, what is the first thing that you think about when you think of the word failure?
I think of a lot of things, but I would like to bring up those early 2000 memes, the epic fail. Do you happen to remember those early days of memehood?
I do. I understand what they're trying to do, but it's like, well, why point it out? If it's epic, you don't need to point it out, right?
It was one of those things where you kind of had to be there, like that was in the beginning of memes itself, back in the I Can Has Cheeseburger days.
Oh, God, yeah.
And it wasn't just a meme that you would share like on MySpace or whatever. It was something like people said to each other as a turn of phrase. That was an epic fail. I specifically remember my siblings using it a lot. Thinking of the word failure, I was instantly transported back to a simpler time where planking and parkour and epic fail were things that you would encounter in day-to-day conversations.
I don't get planking. What the hell?
I don't think anyone really got it. It was just a trend.
I fail to understand planking. I failed. What is the most interesting epic fail meme that you've seen?
Most interesting epic fail meme.
Yeah, or it could be just a usage that you did with your family.
It was mostly just usage amongst my brothers. It's a very nostalgic meme for me because that was back before we were all chronically online all the time. But it was kind of like the beginning of the end in a way.
Yeah.
One thing I wrote down when I was thinking about this was that it's like this hugely demotivating thing for almost everyone that I know, but it's also inevitable. Like it happens every day. It's like always to be expected, mistakes, failures. Like it's almost impossible to avoid, or it is impossible to avoid.
It's also how we learn. What I think of, a couple things. In this conversation I had with John about this, we were talking, he's a big workout guy. He's done personal training and stuff before. And I don't know if you're familiar with the bodybuilder Tom Platz.
Oh man, that's a very muscular guy.
Whenever he's training people, he always wears like a suit, business attire, like business casual wear to the gym. He has a phrase which is, to be successful, you have to train to failure. You fail to success, which is an interesting thought.
Absolutely. I was actually going to bring this up too because my parents used to own a CrossFit gym or like a CrossFit affiliated gym. I don't know how familiar you are with CrossFit, but they have what's called their workout of the day or the WOD. And they'll have instructions like, you're going to do, they call it an AMRAP, as many rounds as possible. They have different acronyms for different types of instructions. And one of the things that comes up sometimes is go to fail, which means keep going until you can't lift the weight or do the push-up or, whatever it is, whatever the activity is, you're supposed to keep going until you literally cannot anymore. So it's interesting because you wouldn't think of that as a tool, but it's a way to get to your limit so that next time the limit is farther along, is 1 rep more or 1 more push-up, slightly heavier weight, whatever mechanism you're using to measure your own strength or fitness.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what Tom Platz was referencing in his phrase that you mentioned.
That's exactly it. I mean, the muscle building process, I think of it sort of as you kind of damage the muscle so it can grow. I don't know if damage is the right word.
I think you're correct. I mean, I think you get stronger by essentially ripping your muscle fibers. You micro tear your muscles so that they grow back stronger.
You don't want to do it aerobically to failure because doesn't that mean your heart gives out?
Oh.
When you're talking about muscle building and the way the muscles work, yes, that has an impact on the heart. Yes, it has an impact on your lungs. Yes, breathing is important, but it's not the same type of activity as an aerobic workout to failure, which I would just say you're just so exhausted that you collapse, and that's not
all over.
within reason. I think that is an important thing to keep in mind. Success through failure.
And I wouldn't say you should necessarily do it all the time, because those are intense workouts where you're basically pushing yourself to the limit. But the concept itself of find that limit so that you can identify it and move past it, that can be applied to other aspects of failure in life as well, I think.
Absolutely. What's another thing I think about? Post-it notes.
You'll have to elaborate for me.
I have to? Okay, well.
You'll have to elaborate.
You fail to understand what I'm talking about?
I'm lost right now.
Okay, so you're not familiar with the story of the Post-it note.
No.
So there was an engineer, a scientist at 3M named Spencer Silver, who was working on developing a super strong adhesive, sort of like a crazy glue. Through his experimentation and whatnot, he created a low-tech, reusable adhesive. He promoted his adhesive as a solution without a problem. And then along came in 1974 a colleague of his, Arthur Fry, and he came up with an idea to use it for bookmarking. He started investigating ways to utilize this adhesive to anchor things in a way that was reusable and didn't leave a residue. They repurposed it in a way that was useful. You can look at that project and go, oh, that's a failure. But Post-its now, once they marketed them properly in the 80s, they just became huge. And now you can't go into an office supply store without seeing Post-its or some Post-it knockoff.
Right. Widely used. I didn't connect the dots, but I did know that story. I did know that anecdote because I watched that John Cleese video you sent me. He mentions that actually in his discussion of the importance of mistakes. He referenced another thing. It had something to do with the first batch of Coca-Cola being a failure of something else.
Some sort of remedy or medicine or something to that effect. And the reason I sent that to you is because there's kind of a circuitous route that we will take here. My stepmother used to work at this company called Video Arts. Started in 1972 by John Cleese and Sir Anthony J. They are television folks. Their focus is learning through using humor. What Anne used to do for the company was she was a sales rep, and they had these cassettes about different aspects of business, training videos, essentially, which used humor to make you think about things. Sort of like that speech for those insurance agents where he was doing the talk about how failure is an important part of the learning process. One of the key video series was about failure, and Anne was at a big pharma-ish company trying to sell these videos. And so she was talking to someone about how they have this really great talk about the importance of failure when you're doing things. And the head of the company said, we can't use that. We can't show that. And she was like, well, why? Because failure means people die.
Right, for a pharmaceutical company.
That is a really, really narrow, close-minded view of what failure is. So I think of that story, and that's what pointed me to that John Cleese thing.
I hadn't seen John Cleese in so many years, so when he came up, I didn't attach a face to the name till he walked onto the stage, and I recognized him. Yeah, I was surprised to hear how many projects he was involved in. I'm not even sure how old he is now, or if I'm sure, is he still alive?
He's still alive.
Okay, I don't know. It was kind of an old video, so I wasn't sure.
Oh, wow. He's 85.
He's getting older, for sure. It's interesting that you brought that up because he actually talks about corporate culture in that video, the importance of making mistakes and redefining failure not as something to be avoided or something that's taboo, because if you say no one is allowed to fail, that's not going to stop people from failing. It's just going to stop people from admitting that they're failing, which creates a larger problem.
And I also think, what's the motivation to innovate or to iterate on something? If you fail, it's like you just stop going that direction. What is the outcome?
Right.
And how people handle that type of quote unquote failure shows the measure of them as an employee, I think. It's not so much about the failure itself. It is about, okay, so you made a mistake here. How are you going to rectify this? What is your plan going forward? I think that's an important part of business, recognizing things not as failures, but opportunities to learn.
The corporate structure of my coffee shop actually phrases it as such. Instead of saying, what problems or issues are you having with employees, they frame it as, what opportunities do you have with so-and-so? I always kind of balk at all corporate speak, but in a way, it's a positive use of language to imply that growing and learning and trying to become better, even when you make mistakes or fail sometimes, build a culture of a workplace. I would say that's generally a positive thing.
Agreed. Not all managers necessarily see it that way, but it is what it is. That John Cleese quote that I picked out of that: a man who's afraid to make mistakes is unlikely to make anything.
Yeah, I wrote down the exact same quote.
That's a great quote. That's part of the process of making something. You go a direction, you see what works, what doesn't work, and then you iterate on that.
It's the foundation of progress itself.
Yeah, that's an excellent way to put it. The foundation of progress is failure.
There's no way to create something perfectly or innovate without messing up. Back when I was learning to code, I oftentimes had to spend more time actually debugging and examining the framework of my code than I did writing it in the first place. I don't think it's possible. You can't just snap your fingers and do something perfectly the first time.
Well, I can definitely do that.
I guess, yeah, you're just maestro or whatever.
No, I'm just kidding. Structurally, points of failure in engineering or in a process, in failure analysis.
Right.
What do you think about that as a concept? People will say that you try and minimize the single point of failure, essentially. You don't want your single points of failure in a process necessarily. They are looked upon as undesirable. But I would say in some cases, the single point of failure is something you would want because you will know exactly where to go to fix the thing, right? I mean,
right.
It's not like you build in single points of failure. Why wouldn't you want a single point? That's where you go. You know exactly what failed. What do you think about that? And also, it applies to coding, right?
Right.
I mean, error trapping is kind of building that in, isn't it?
Error trapping. Yeah, obviously, we'd all like to live in a world where you can have something that works perfectly.
In a world where something works perfectly.
But I don't know of anything that's ever worked completely perfectly, except maybe like a really strong chair. But even then...
There was a wrestler back in the day whose name was Mr. Perfect.
Oh, okay.
And he would have this thing called the perfect Plex. And then everyone would ask him how it worked. And he said, perfectly.
Exactly. I think you're right on the money there with the idea that you want to be able to identify the points of failure in a feat of engineering, in code, or in a process of any sort.
Right.
Because that's the first step to finding out how we, one, improve upon that. How do we change it, make it better? Or how do we adjust to move past it, to overcome it? And I think it's an important part of the engineering process. It's even a good part of management processes when you're managing groups of people, or if you're trying to run a business of any sort. You have to be able to identify weak points in order to successfully move past them so they don't become a hindrance to you. So having them out in the open, addressing them, is a key part of the whole thing, whether it's building a bridge or running a retail store, or whatever you're trying to accomplish.
From what I've seen, the concern with the SPOF, the single point of failure, it interrupts the entire system from working. What I was saying, and this is just after me thinking about it a little bit more, my approach is the single point of recovery. That's what I was thinking.
The SPOR.
The SPOR, not the SPOF. In the system, where to go to fix the thing. That's the single point of recovery. When you're building something, you want those single points of recovery to be in areas that don't disrupt the entire system. So I guess I understand the whole single point of failure being a negative thing because it interrupts the whole process. Do you have anything else to say about failure that doesn't relate to video games?
Oh, yeah, I did have one more thing I want to talk about, which is how different failure as a concept is in academic settings. We've talked a lot about failure in the workplace and different company protocols and how they deal with it. I've been lucky enough to work with several companies that see it as part of the process, as something that's inevitable. And oftentimes, when you do make a mistake, instead of it being this horrible thing, you take it to what's the next step? How do I address this? How do we move forward? Instead of something to be feared or dreaded, even if you might feel a little bit upset in the moment.
It's an opportunity to improve. And it's important to deal with those feelings too, so you can think clearly and move forward.
I'm always an advocate for feeling your feelings. I don't think anything constructive comes from trying to deny them. In some academic settings, when you have failure as something that is defined as only knowing, I believe the range is 60 to 70% of the knowledge that you're supposed to know. If you only know 60 to 70%, that's considered failure.
Yeah.
Which is a little strange. It is understandable from a standpoint of wanting your students to be able to understand something thoroughly and being at a point where they can explain it confidently. But I think it creates this apprehension towards getting something wrong, especially when they go to extremes to avoid it. It's interesting how we set up students and learners that way. Failing a class, failing a test will essentially set you up to be apprehensive in the future towards making mistakes, when it's so different from how actual company cultures work.
As far as the school mentality is concerned, I've got 30 people in a class. 20 of those people get 90%. I'm one of the people who gets 80%. And because we're on a bell curve, I get a failure because compared to the other people, I didn't do as well. That to me is very demotivating. I know it's used at the college level to weed people out, but that's not a measure of how much you learn. So that's kind of a problem that I have with education, mostly at the collegiate level, is when they use the bell curve, because it's not really an accurate measurement of understanding something.
I solidly agree with that. I experienced that firsthand the first time I took calculus, which I passed in the end. I'll just say that right here and now. I passed calculus, but I had the unfortunate experience of having a professor who decided that if we got 89% or higher on the midterm, he would boost the grade by 10%. But if we got anything lower than 89, he would drop the grade by 10%.
The entire class, right? Not just one person.
No, the entire class.
On average. Okay.
Because I believe I scored something in the realm of the 87 or 88 on my midterm. So, of course, I got a 77 instead, which dropped me a letter grade. In the end, I was only able to pass calculus because I was so dedicated to doing all of my homework that the homework credit pushed me back up to a passing grade. But I feel like in those instances, it's just an example of how those curves kind of twist and distort and demotivate people from trying to achieve.
Is the point to give someone a base of knowledge? No, that's just to motivate people who want to be the best, quote unquote. So they will do that. But that doesn't make them the most innovative. That doesn't make them the most creative. A person is too complex to basically blanket say, this person doesn't know enough to move on to the next thing.
Right.
And here's the other thing as far as grading is concerned, like math. Math kind of makes sense to me as far as, do you know formulas? Do you know this concept that you can apply in real life to whatever? Where it doesn't make sense is something like writing or any kind of thing where it's very subjective. So you're saying that I failed based on your opinion as opposed to based on any solid kind of comparison. It's more open to interpretation, those types of classes that are the creative.
Yeah.
And a story that I had which is not so much about not understanding failure as it is my not understanding success. When I was just out of high school, I was going to take classes in architecture at the University of Illinois, Chicago Circle in the city. I was in a class and we had this project where we each got assigned a square area on a map of Chicago, and that was our area. And what we had to do was we had to go to that area and pick up garbage that defines or describes the area. And then we would represent it on a square, and then they would take a photo of this thing and then put it on a big mural, and it would be a representation of Chicago made entirely of garbage.
Okay, I'm following.
I went to my square area, which you're probably not familiar with Chicago, but it's the Chicago River, and there's this building that it just kind of goes back and forth between being a mall and being an office building. So it just kind of went through a cycle of every couple of years. It was called the Merchandise Mart. And then you had Lower Wacker Drive was the other side with the river. There was Upper Wacker and Lower Wacker. And then also the Helene Curtis building, which was this big green glass monstrosity, basically just a green glass building. So what I did was I found a green Sprite bottle, which I used for the Helene Curtis building. I found an old shoe on Lower Wacker Drive that someone left behind, which I used as the Merchandise Mart. I found some cellophane. I found a metal strap. So I just basically physically represented the things in the area with garbage. And it was just, kind of just phoned it in. And when I brought my thing in, took the photo, the professors were like, "Oh my gosh, that's exactly what the Merchandise Mart is. It's a shoe. It's an old shoe." There was no intent there, right? And to me, that was so demotivating because like, well, I didn't even do anything. I just represented the things that looked like they were the sizes. I didn't really think about it. And yet I'm getting an A grade. And so
getting a standing ovation for representing it as a shoe.
And that confused me because it was like, I did nothing to earn this.
Right.
But the lesson to be learned from that is even if you didn't try, there was a learning opportunity there. And instead of being, I didn't deserve this, I should have gone, based on my observations of what they think is successful, I can use that going forward. I can learn from that success.
Right.
Even though I think it's a failure, I now know what they're focused on. I now know a little bit more about them. But I didn't have that wisdom at the age of 20.
So for that assignment, when they wanted you to represent those areas, were you supposed to represent them visually, like by artfully curating the trash to like resemble the region, or was it supposed to be more of a story type representation?
It could be whatever you wanted, essentially. There was no rule there.
I think that them projecting their connection of Chicago onto your art project was a success in its own way, even if it's not something that, it's one of those things where art is kind of left up to the interpretation of the viewer.
Right.
Even if it's an old shoe.
And I felt I didn't deserve that. I did nothing. Why am I getting an A on this project that I did nothing? And that was back in those days when I didn't really understand that there were lessons to be learned from that. This just seemed like I did nothing and I got an A. This doesn't seem like the right program for me.
Right. Well, what was the class, if you remember?
I don't remember the name of the class, but it was one of the core, more artsy oriented classes. It wasn't like the statics, dynamics, science,
Right.
calculus. We had to do sketches of various areas. We would be sent out exploring Chicago essentially and drawing, doing projects. There was one where we had to come up with an educational toy that would teach people about architecture. So if that gives you any idea of what the course was, it was more of an artistic course.
That's pretty funny.
It's a shoe. It's a big shoe. That's what it is.
Well, I took an engineering course once that was about, it was about engineering principles, one of which was working in groups and teams. I had a group project where we all had to build our own instrument, and then we had to play a song together, the ASU fight song. So My team, we all did our part. We all built our instruments and we all sent in our individual parts for each other. And when put together, I am not kidding you, it was awful. Like, it sounded like maybe you could call it music if it was some sort of neo-industrial. It was truly terrible. The point being, we got an A on that assignment too. So,
but I mean, you had a more positive outlook on that. You learned stuff from this experience, right?
Exactly. But the lesson in the end wasn't that we, had to make a perfect song. It's that we all worked together and we collaborated and, did our best. Sometimes the lesson are the shoes that we meet along the way. So,
yeah. Maybe that was the thing. There wasn't really a lesson necessarily to be learned other than go out to this area and explore. Maybe that was the lesson. Explore your area of Chicago. And this whole thing about being creative with the different things that you find all around, maybe that's part of the learning. Or maybe I picked up the shoe because that's what I thought it was and I didn't realize it at the time. I mean, I wasn't as artistic as I am now. I separated artistic things from analytical things for some reason. I didn't blend them together. I didn't think that they went together. I thought they were more like oil and water. You've got one or you got the other. And that's simply just not true.
Right.
You live and you learn. And it only took me 30 years or whatever. Better late than never. You want to talk about failure in video games?
Yeah, let's dive into video games now. I know I have a couple, but I'm interested to hear what games that you have on your mind.
Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop. The developer is Beard Envy Games. I think beards are evil. I don't know. I don't trust people with beards. I think it's a me problem.
Like it.
Published by Casado Games. Been playing it for weeks now. Did we ever talk about Lucas Pope and Papers, Please? Did you ever play Papers, Please?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It has that kind of energy to me because rockets come in and you have to fix them, but you don't know how to fix them until you read the manual. And so you go through a process where you learn how to do one thing really well and investigate all the points that you need to and fix it. And then it adds more things as the days go on. And as you advance the story, basically, you're the new employee, but you have to pay rent every month. Different things happen in the story as the days go on and as you pay different rents. There are also little bits where characters that want you to steal things and you can crack safes, and there are notes in your big manual about how to do things like that and how to deactivate security alarms. But it all revolves around reading instructions in a manual and applying those things that you learn. You got to unclog the toilet. And at first, it takes 5 minutes to figure it out. And then the second time, it takes less time. And then it just becomes second nature. And that's just basically the way the game behaves. The tasks get more and more complicated. It's reading instructions, interpreting those instructions, and applying them. But you are going to either run out of time, make mistakes as far as you didn't quite fix everything the way that you were supposed to. And as you play those games, if you don't make enough rent, then you die and you've got to start the cycle all over again. And then it's kind of a thing where you go as far as you can and then the game ends. You start back at the beginning, but you have knowledge. And then there's also other things that carry over, but you have to obtain certain currencies to carry things over from cycle to cycle.
That's interesting.
Part of the process is not doing things exactly right and learning how to fix those things. And I think that's kind of a failure sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I can also see the parallel you were drawing between this Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop and Papers, Please, because it sounds like the gameplay loop has shared elements, especially the complexity increasing over time and people also trying to get you to be subversive in one way or another. And so this is a game that's not currently available on like Steam.
As of the date of this podcast release, I believe it is available on Steam. I have it for the PlayStation 5 myself.
Because I would love to check it out.
Yeah. I do have some negative things about the game, which I'm just going to say briefly. It's trying to be this style that's based on Rick and Morty, But essentially all that boils down to is swearing and saying edgy stuff, and it feels a little forced to me.
Right.
I think that this kind of game would have been an excellent game for kids as far as reading and following directions. But in its current state, I can't recommend it to kids because of all the questionable stuff.
Right.
But it is really a great puzzle-y, trying to figure out things, how to follow directions, how to build the IKEA furniture or whatever. It's a lot of fun. I am enjoying myself. I haven't played all the way through the main story, but apparently there are 4 different endings you can get depending on the choices you make throughout the game. I'm probably not going to play through the 4 different endings, but I definitely want to get through one full playthrough before I do my written review.
Interesting. Well, it's a shame that the artistic direction kind of took away from some of that value, because I can see what you're saying, where it would be a really positive thing for people of all ages to practice those cognitive skills. I guess you could chalk it up to marketing appeal or trying to draw a user base in, but it's just kind of a shame.
It's a specific audience. Think of the Pixar movies, right? They're for kids and adults. There are things that are in there that kids don't understand, but adults do. And there are things that kids do understand and adults don't. So it appeals to a broader audience. If you're going to be on a console like a Switch or like PlayStation 5, I think you need a more broad appeal. You also have this component where it's an independent game, and the vision is make it seem like a Rick and Morty and have like those types of jokes and so on and so forth. But I think it would be a really, really awesome, popular game if they didn't do the Rick and Morty approach, because there is a lot of value in the lessons it teaches. To some extent, Papers, Please is the same way, right? But in general, I think Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop, even though it says it's roguelite, I don't like using roguelite and roguelike. I don't like using Pac-Man-like. I don't like using Galaxian-like. It's when you say it's Aerosmith-like. People don't... It's not... when I think of a roguelite... Well, you know what? What do you think of? When you think of a roguelite or a roguelike game, what do you think that is?
Well, up until today, I had no understanding of the distinction between roguelike and roguelite, and I used them somewhat interchangeably and always with slight apprehension that Arden, my partner, would correct me one way or the other.
Yeah.
But I always think of games where the possibility of failure is imminent. The goal is built into the mechanics of the game itself. You're working towards completing something perfectly in one go. It's interesting how that can be applied to so many different types of games, because off the top of my head, Plate Up, if you've ever played that, it's a restaurant management game where you have to build and grow your restaurant and serve increasingly more clientele, as well as have complicated rules that pop up every few days. And if you end up not serving a customer in time, whether it's like they've waited too long or their food didn't come fast enough, then it's game over.
Right.
You know, I think of games like that, or even I recently completed Baldur's Gate 3 in honor mode, which is a single save file, and if you have a total party wipeout at any point, the game ends.
And people die, right? Like permanently, they're dead. You can't access them anymore.
Well, if you have party members die in combat, most of the time you can bring them back to life.
Okay.
But it's different than the other game modes because you can't reload saves, and there are certain things that are different. You know, if you make a choice earlier in the game, there's no way to undo it, essentially. And then there's also much harder mechanics with respect to boss fights.
Mm-hmm.
It's really challenging, and they reward you with an achievement on Steam or, you know, on your console, as well as new shiny golden dice to play with for any future playthroughs. So,
has your stance on barrelmancy changed?
I still think barrelmancy shouldn't be like a crutch, but it's a fun tool, and I will admit that there are some times where I use it because it's faster than the alternative.
Yeah.
I'll cop to it. I beat my most recent honor mode run, which was not my first one, my second honor mode run, by throwing a backpack full of bombs at the final boss.
Nice.
And and it worked. I did that just because my roommate Scarlett shared a video with me, I think from TikTok or something like that, where the person who uploaded the video used a backpack full of bombs. And I just thought that was ridiculous, but also funny, so I had to try it. And sure enough, it worked.
Backpack full of bombs. Hashtag, it's not barrels.
Yeah.
Rogue light, roguelike. I think you can more accurately describe something. Don't say it's like this. Don't say it's a Star Wars like when it's a sci-fi movie or whatever. When I think of one of those roguelite is looping, you can think of a game, arcade game, as looping, but you're just playing through the game, you're learning things, you're getting better, and then you loop. But I'm talking about the way you progress, the way you build your character as sort of a looping development progression. It can be you get more skills that you can utilize, you get access to different weapons, you find things that allow you to go further in exploring the level or exploring the map.
Like in Hades.
Exactly. That's another one of those you fail to complete the level, but then not only does your character gain things, and not only do those things that you find and you gain contribute to the way the story unfolds and the way the story is told, but it also builds your character up. So definitely.
Right.
Are there any other games that you think of when you think of a failure kind of thing built in? I mean, you can apply it to any game essentially, because that's how you're learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, in any game that you play, or at least most games you play, there's points of failure like falling off a cliff or being felled by an enemy. But one of the first games I thought of was Kenshi, which I know I've discussed a little bit in our episodes, but I wanted to dive more into the mechanics of, it's not even, I guess it's considered leveling characters, but Kenshi is different because your characters that you have, or, you know, it could be a single one or it could be multiple, they don't have levels attached to them in the way that you do in most games, where you're like, oh, now you're level 1, now you're level 2. In Kenshi, you just have stats and you build them over time with what you choose to do.
Okay.
And in order to survive long enough to explore the world, because it's a world that's like rife with biological horrors, you have to get beat up. You have to get pretty much like beaten to the brink of death, and then you have to survive, heal, and go back out there and get beat up again. And eventually it builds your toughness stat so that eventually when you get, you know, attacked, you're strong enough to defend yourself. Like as you're fighting people and losing and getting beat up, you're building your strength if you're using a heavy weapon, or you're building your accuracy if you're using a crossbow, or you're building attack if you're using a light sword, and you're always building toughness every time you get beat up and left to die. But hopefully you have a way to get back up again. And it's possible that your character can die, but a lot of people use the strategy of they'll have one of their characters stand off in a distance so that after someone gets beat up, they can go and bandage their wounds and carry them back to a bed so that they can heal. And so basically failure and getting beat up is baked into the core concepts of Kenshi, where in order to become strong, you have to be weak first. There are mods and things that you can use to cheat and cheese it and make yourself all-powerful. But most of the fan base of Kenshi actually tries to make the game even harder. There's other people who will use exploits like, I mean, Kenshi is a brutal game. Like, you can establish a settlement and you can create a prison and you can, you know, lock up your enemies and beat them up and like trap them in rooms. So people will try to train their stats like that. But there's also training dummies that you can build and things of the sort. When I think of failure in video games, I definitely think about Kenshi and how brutal it is to start a new game, because you're just a weak person on this moon in a world full of scary factions and monsters, and you have to build yourself up from nothing, basically.
But as far as the story goes, do you die Or is it a matter of you fail upwards? When you fail, you're building your stats.
You have to fail upwards, and there's no real story in Kenshi. It's something of like a sandbox game,
Okay.
but it's big open world sandbox with all sorts of different factions, and you can influence the factions and the world itself, but there's no storyline beyond what you can come up with in your own mind.
That's interesting. The more I think about this, the more I think about looping. I think of looping mechanics as those that you learn or progress in some way, shape, or form. It's repetition, but you keep on expanding the loop, so to speak. You keep on broadening the knowledge as you're going forward, either yourself or the character or both. A game that has to do with failure and trying to figure out which way to continue. Did you ever play Deathloop? Or did Arden ever play Deathloop?
I think Arden played Deathloop, but I have never played it.
The now defunct Arcane Entertainment. Those folks made Dishonored. That was a fun game. Whale Oil Punk.
Oh, yeah. That was a good one.
It was really good. Deathloop didn't get super high marks. I think it got 80s. Well, no, it looks like it did. It's just that it didn't get high sales. Metacritic aggregate scores of 87, 88, 89. But anyway, the whole point of that game is you're kind of stuck in a time loop and you have to try and break the loop. And that's the whole purpose. Then the way you break the loop is you've got to eliminate a series of enemies individually, and you've got to figure out the best way to advance through the different parts of the day. You've got your choice of different parts of the map that you can access depending on what part of the day it is. Depending on what part of the story you've gone through, you can figure out where they are located and where they are going to be in time. You figure out pieces of how you're going to string them all together in order to kill all of them. Failure is a part of the game.
Right.
You can think of going through a full day and not killing all the things as failure, but you're revealing pieces of the story, playing through a day, which is a full loop.
That goes kind of back to like the iterative progress. The failure is part of the game in the respect that it's how you learn and how you become good enough to achieve the goals of the game.
Right. It's a Groundhog Day kind of thing where you're trying to break the loop. You're learning about your character and the other characters and where they're going to be and how they're going to behave and where certain things are located through this whole thing. So your character's learning through failing to break the loop. Also, you are learning through not breaking the loop.
Right.
It's not like you've got to figure it all from the ground up. You have notes and you can figure out what things you need to do in order to make other things happen later on. There's one where you have to assassinate a character. You can assassinate him on a certain day where he's going to be somewhere. He does fireworks at night around this party. You need to figure out how to break into the little shed and then how to sabotage the fireworks. So when he does the show, they explode and blow him up. You can kill him in other ways, but in order to get the perfect loop to break it, you have to kill him that way while he's off screen. And you hear him over the loudspeaker go, "Oh crap," and then you see an explosion in the distance.
There's a couple games I wanted to talk about that it's not necessarily about failure as progress, but more that the game thematically deals with failure.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I did talk about Dragon Age Veilguard earlier. Essentially, you are put in a position of leadership very early on in the game. So the game thematically oftentimes deals with your own conceptualization of your team's success and your team's failures, and the fact that not being able to make perfect choices is going to happen a lot.
Right.
And I really enjoyed that aspect of the game, even if there were some other parts of it that people don't like. You know, I hear a lot of people saying that Dragon Age Veilguard was written poorly, and I don't know if I necessarily agree with that. I do think it's different from the others in the series, especially with respect to lore and the general levity of the game. It's set far enough into the future that you're not going to be able to easily run into characters, or a lot of the characters from the first games, but there are a couple that carry over. The gameplay really emphasizes the difficulty of choices and the fact that there is going to be failure as a leader, because it's impossible to be perfect. It's impossible to save everyone. Even going into the climax and resolution of the game, that's something that you as a player have to deal with, which I was surprised by. But it's really a good game for what it is. I don't think it deserves all of the hate that it gets, but people are always going to be complicated and complaining about things, and that's just like, that's just what gamers do. So it's to be expected in a way.
Yeah.
The other one that I thought really deals with failure as a concept as far as part of the story itself was Disco Elysium. And
oh, yeah.
The main character himself starts the game as what many people would describe as a failure, somebody who's
a disgrace,
who's like a drunk, and, people around you are disappointed in you. And then like the mechanics of the game themselves make it so that failing your actual, because there's a game based on dice rolling, similar to Baldur's Gate, where like a lot of the times you're making skill checks with a physical roll of the dice, but sometimes failing those rolls can lead to positive things.
Right.
So it's one of those lessons where the game is telling you that failing isn't necessarily the end, and it's not necessarily a bad thing, because you don't know what doors are going to open and which doors are going to close.
From a story perspective, yeah.
Right, exactly. There's one point which is kind of funny. It's not really a plot spoiler, but you come across these two old men who are playing a game, and you assume that they're playing shot put. So you grab the ball, and if you succeed the check, you end up hurling their ball in the sea. Then they get super mad at you too. But if you fail the check, then you accidentally throw the ball just like a foot away from you, and they applaud you and reveal that they've been playing the game Petanque, which I don't know much about that game, but it's funny how it really plays with the concept of skill checks and successes and failures at times.
Turns it on his ear a little bit.
Yeah.
Any game that involves dice rolls, I think that's forgivable. There was a game long ago on the PC called Indigo Prophecy, and there was a part in the game where if you were successful, your game ended.
Right.
But if you failed, then you progress the story. That's sort of changing the rules, and it's just like, it's annoying when 90% of the game you try and succeed. After doing it like a dozen times, you go, okay, whatever. That kind of thing can be annoying. But if it's built into the chance of a dice roll, I think it's a little bit more palatable.
Right. And that makes sense. That covers the basics of failure, both as like a mechanic of learning, and then also some stories and games that really just dig into it a little bit farther as a concept.
Did you ever play Super Meat Boy? I mean, you got those types of games where the level is really complicated and you are going to fail. You're going to fail many times before you get through it. And some people really enjoy that super difficult kind of thing where you got to get the pattern exactly right or you're not going to proceed. I don't find that much fun, but I can see where that can be appealing to people because it's like they can wear a badge of honor. I got through this really tough part where it did this thing.
Right. It's definitely meant to be rewarding when you finally overcome the extreme difficulty. And Arden really likes those types of games. I prefer to play things when I get them at the most moderate level, like the way that the game is intended to be played. And then if I really like the game, then I'll play it on the harder difficulty next time. And I like to build difficulty slowly, but having it be really difficult from the start, like Divinity Original Sin 2, for example, is sometimes demotivating when it comes to playing games.
I hate to go back to Uncle Chop's Rocket Shop, but you saying that just made me think of something. One thing that I don't like about that game is when you get a new thing, like, you got your oil and you got to figure out how to check the components to make sure that you can depressurize the container before you actually change the oil or else it'll explode, different things. And as you get further on, it gets more and more complex, but there's no opportunity to practice. So it kind of forces you to play the loop in order to learn, which can get a little frustrating. I wish there was a mechanism by which you could practice the different components. You unlock the thing. Okay, cool. Now we're going to put you through some practice scenarios and you can get better at it. So before you actually service a customer's vehicle, I don't know if that would ruin it.
I guess the rocket shop doesn't pay its workers for training.
No, it does not. It's true. They give you your book and they go, here you go, have fun.
Get in there.
Get in there. There was one mission that happened recently where when you play through one of the loops, there's a guy who crash lands right next to where you stay. And what he says is, hey, I've got this little doohickey here that's broken. I'll be out of your hair in 3 days when the part arrives, so don't worry about it. And what you can do is you can figure out that you've got a storage area that will allow you to heal or repair whatever the thing is if you leave it in there overnight. Once I unlock that thing, I remove the doohickey, I put it in that tray, come back the next day, and it's magically fixed. And then I put it in the rocket, and he goes, oh, thank you very much. And then he goes to take off, and his ship explodes. And he ends up dying. And then his ghost follows you around. So it's like, I succeeded, but I didn't succeed because he's dead. So anyway, let's wrap it up.
Final thoughts on failure is just that one of my biggest points in becoming an adult and maturing was realizing that failing was going to happen. And instead of being scared of it, it's a good thing to accept and reframe it as knowing and trusting myself to be well equipped to handle any failures that I might encounter, and know that it's only going to be an opportunity to grow as a person.
That's an excellent way to think about it. You still have to take responsibility for your actions. You still have to take responsibility for what you did, but part of that assessment is a learning process, and it's very important in everyone's day-to-day life. My final words, you're not a Star Trek person, right?
Not really.
In the fictional universe of Star Trek, there is a thing called the Kobayashi Maru. And the Kobayashi Maru is a simulation that was created in the Kelvin universe by Spock. He creates a simulation where the whole point is it's not winnable. You cannot win it. The lesson that you learn from that is there are going to be certain situations. How do you handle failure? How do you handle to navigate and, minimize the possibility of the amount of crew you're going to lose, or, all these different things. So it's an unwinnable scenario. And of course, Kirk comes along and figures out a way to cheat the system and blah, blah, blah. But he thinks that it's unfair, that it's unwinnable. But the lesson in that failure is more important than succeeding. So success is learning the lesson as opposed to winning the scenario.
Right.
So don't be afraid of failure. It's an important part of learning. And inventing Post-its. Just ask Romy and Michelle.
But if you're trying to make a building stand up, probably have your failure in controlled environments.
Exactly. Make sure you go through a lot of testing phases of your structures. That's the problem with structures, right? There's a point at which you need to build it. You can minimize the possibility, and you can see certain visible things in a structure that indicate failure, like forces where it looks like something's about to shear, or, like the pattern of the wood, or splintering, or, any number of things that indicate a possible failure. But you're not going to catch all of them. And it usually takes a long time before your building will fall down, right? I mean, you don't know if it's a successful building. What does success look like in a building? A building that lasts how many years before it has to be replaced? I mean, is that how you define success? So anyway, I digress. Cheyenne, thank you so much for joining us on this week's episode. We need to do more of these, and I am glad you are happy in Portland.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And until the next episode.
Yep. Where we're going to be talking about, I don't know, we'll figure something out. Plankton. No,
Yes.
You want to talk about
That one would be
plankton?
hard.
Yeah, it would be
That one
hard.
would be hard to apply.
I probably would talk about that game Seaman.
See,
It's a game that features these things that you bring up in a sort of an aquarium and they talk to you. They're like fish with faces. It's really creepy looking. They're kind of a Tamagotchi kind of thing. And actually, another Spock connection. The introduction is Leonard Nimoy. He tells you about what you're doing with these seamen. So anyway, but we can talk about that later when we do the Plankton show. So thank you, audience, for joining us on this week's episode. My name is Ben.
and my name is Cheyenne.
And we've been your hosts. Have a wonderful night. Bye.
Bye.